Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, Professor Diwakar Shukla, he's a professor and dean, Faculty of Journalism and Creative Studies, and Faculty of Liberal Arts and Humanities, Jagran Lake City University, Bhopal. Professor Shukla brings with him a unique confluence of academics and praxis and has more than 2 decades of specialization in the fields of communication for development, social and behavioral change, media research, communication strategies, and brand communication, with premier organizations like World Bank, Indian Express, European Union projects, and Dutch bilateral program, along with over 14 years at the world's largest communication organization, Ogilvy. A TEDx speaker, he has mentored students as a visiting faculty at premier management institution. He is a member of the national panel that supports UNICEF's social and behavioral change communication curriculum development in India. In addition, he holds the office of the Secretary Communication Committee, Association of the Universities of Asia and the Pacific. I would now request Chairperson Professor V.L. Dharurkar to introduce him and continue with the panel.
Shukla ji has very rich experience, both academic and professional, and he has a perspective of his own. He is working in Jagran Lake University. Sir, now boon the audience with your rich experience, professional experience and also academic experience. आपका स्वागत है शुक्ला जी, आप शुरू करें.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this introduction. I'm really honored to be part of this extremely illustrious panel. And my apologies to you, sir, to my co-panelists, and to everyone at National Media Conclave that I'm unable to be there in person. But so because I'm traveling right now, but it's an honor again to be able to speak to all of you. It's a very interesting topic that has been given to us as a part of this particular panel, and something which I have been extremely passionate about, because I've seen how digital transformation has interacts with communities in general and women and children in particular. And I think I have some perspectives which I want to put it forward in front of the chairman, sir, and my co-panelist. We all know that for the past decades, a lot of effort has been made for digital inclusion for women worldwide, with the ultimate aim and perspective that it would obviously empower women in a larger context and bring about a gender equality. The question arises for all of us to understand, what is this rapid digital transformation means for gender and equality? And does it really point towards an inclusive future? I feel to some extent, yes, it does. But in a larger context, I think we are still missing few things as far as the digital transformation and women empowerment is concerned. The process is extremely slow, as we all know about it. There are extremely good advances which have been made in terms of digital access. Now, digital access in terms of, if you measure it, it means essentially from a perspective of network coverage and in terms of hardware and software. But I think rather than more than the digital access, it is the holistic perspectives and understanding of inclusion that we as policymakers should be taking care of. And I think when I talk about that, it means abilities, it means awareness, and it also means agency as well. To understand the digital gender perspectives of the digital, particularly from a mobile and internet perspectives, and it's not just about a very merely descriptive perspective that we need to take. We need to look at it in a very dynamic space. There's a concept that many of you would definitely know, which is often called as a feedback loop. There's a concept of low equilibrium traps. There's a concept of multi-dimensional inclusion, exclusion that we see in any of the development programs that we see. And we also know from a design perspective, actually, or a design thinking perspective, there's a systems analysis that we often end up doing when we talk of policies. To be very honest, my sense is, looking at the topic, that we really genuinely need, along with other things which are already happening, we genuinely need a lot of shift in perspectives. And I think shift in perspective for me means that we need to look just beyond the digital access. Now, one of the things we all know about is the moment anybody talks about digital inclusion, I've seen it happening in many places, many states of India, and in fact, worldwide in Africa as well. where the moment a women or the group of women get the mobile phones or they get access to a computer, it is assumed to be that they have been integrated with the digital transformation. Frankly speaking, that's not true, because I think that is where the perspectives have to come into play. So I think what is very, very important is whether women are able to take advantage of digital access, which often the policymakers and the policies provide them with. Now, there's a catch out there, what I feel. It's like if you take an analogy of economics, it's of a perpetual loop that we operate in. Imagine a person who gets into a poverty, trap. Is it easier for that person to come out of the poverty? It's not easy at all, because the person or the group of people do need external push and nudges for them to escape this poverty trap or the vicious circle that we have often called it, or Gunal Mandal had called it long years back. So I think in the same analogy, the digital transformation, digital inclusiveness also plays a very important part. So what is needed right now is, according to me, is that there has to be a shift from the current focus on internet and mobile access and the proximate factors which we call as availability, accessibility, abilities and awareness that we keep on talking about, to a much broader consideration of feedback loop. Now, feedback loop is a very interesting concept which was brought about years back in one of the research papers, where they talked about the digital exclusion is nothing else but the social inclusion that we see for ourselves. So what happens in context? That if women do not have access to financial means, if women do not have access to policy, women do not have access to decision making, and various other kind of exclusion that we see in our society. The moment those particular set of women are given the digital tools, many times those women are able to use it very effectively and then go beyond it. But most of the times the feedback loop concept comes into play, whereby if you are trapped into that, then even if you give them an internet technology, even if you give them a digital devices, it does not really help them in becoming more inclusive. It still keeps them exclusive. In fact, on the contrary, I see that the moment that particular social exclusion happens, until unless that is addressed, digital exclusion also follows. So it is a myth to say that in case if the society or the group of women are socially excluded from various things, but if you give them the digital technology, they'll be able to integrate them. That does not happen actually, honestly. So digital exclusion actually reflects the social exclusion which we see around ourselves. So I think that's something which is very, very important. So many people, many researchers have talked about this holistic perspective, and I think it is high time to see that. I would also say one more thing. In most of the places in India, wherever those experiments have been done, or in Africa, or also in Latin America, there have been amazingly great success stories of digital inclusion. But they are far and few. I think in a larger macro sense, if you look at it, one needs to take digital inclusion and digital transformation in sync with what is happening in terms of the social exclusion, or what you call, the gap in terms of women accessing other things as well. So I think that's something that we'll have to keep in mind when we look at various things. So my point is that one needs to relook at the existing frameworks of digital inclusion. That is a policy matter, and it does involve a more holistic and a larger dimension of it. As digital evangelists, we call it, or digital policy makers, one has to look at the interactions between different dimensions of inequality. The moment we say digital inequality, does it mean that you give them a device, you give them internet technology, you give them the systems, everything goes away? It does not, because one has not looked at with various dimensions of inequality. So it's a very plain thing which I'm talking about. As any economist, as any sociologist, as any anthropologist look at inequality and say, okay, if I have to address this inequality, I have to look at it in a larger perspective, in a more holistic or what you call wide angle perspective. Same way digital exclusion has to be looked into. I bring this point, Chairman Sir, is only because many times I've seen it, even in policy making, even at the state level, one of the first things which many of the policymakers, I'm sorry to say, bring up is internet access, fair enough, and also the devices. It could be computer, it could be mobile phone. to be very honest, it does not always work in this way. I mean, we all know, many of you out there in the audiences as well as a part of this illustrious panel, you all know that giving something in a resource does not really mean that you empower somebody. It means that there a capacity building happening in terms of usage of that particular thing. So I think that's something which I wanted to bring up. And SDG many times have also failed to address these issues when we talk of digital inclusion from a perspective of SDGs as well. So I think one of the key things from a program perspective or the policy perspective I would try to submit here is that one has to invest into programs that given women mobile phones will be less effective due to negative feedback, a negative loop that I talked about. So I think it's important for us to create that particular interventions that give women easier access to technology. So many places I know in Gujarat, I know in Maharashtra, I know in some other parts of the country, where the IT community centers have come up. There's a group of women who come up and they try to empower each other. There's a peer-to-peer kind of a usage of the technology happening. It has been fairly successful. I would not say it's a best case, but it has done. Only thing is, these community IT centers have been able to kind of provide a momentum to understanding of these particular technologies and how to use it. And that's very important. And also, the frameworks, as I talked about, of digital technology also has to be sensitive enough to understand the women's and the social needs in that context. That is number one. Gender divide, in any case, we all know in the country, and for that matter, in many of the countries, is always a challenge. So digital inclusion or digitally access leading to empowerment and enhancement of women's powers would also entail ensuring that there is a wider kind of an address towards the gender divide itself. So I think that's very important. The third point which I want to put it, and I think that is where I'll try to close the entire thing. I think we would have to seriously start looking at this particular digital inclusion that we're talking about, and we need to start saying it inclusion by design. I think we need to, as policymakers, as researchers, as academicians, we need to start thinking, can we create a better gender responses designs for digital welfare or digital inclusion? So I think it's a question of design thinking that I'm trying to bring into play. And my sense is, looking at small examples where I've been part of it or I've seen it happening, I think inclusion by design should be one of the key tenets of any policy making, rather than thinking about providing access about technology and thinking that women will be able to kind of get into play also. If you look at some of the key things which even UNDP has talked about at a global level, they've talked about some of the key barriers which create this inequality. And I think one of the things we all know about is the gender norms itself and the cultural stereotypes itself. Now, we have to look into that before we start assuming that policies will be able to provide inclusion and provide equality to women the moment the digital technology is given to them. So I think national and international and local digitization strategies have to be recreated or reframed or reformulated from a perspective of design thinking, from a perspective of inclusion by design, as I said it. One has to look at a larger holistic picture of a gender equality in a larger sense and see where exactly this gender, this digital pillar sits into the entire scheme of things. I think it's all interrelated, so you can't have it in silo. Third thing is, I think e-governance is a brilliant thing which many places that has been supremely successful. But I think there are still rough edges in that particular e-governance model when it comes to women. In many of the states, we do see that happening. So one has to look into that aspect from a policy making perspective. I really feel, and this is something which the national government has also done, the states are doing it. I think digital employment and entrepreneurship is a very, very big play. Believe me, like it has happened, all of you know, when it comes to livelihood development, women are absolutely smart set of community in our lives. The moment you give them a challenge, they are able to use their own innate knowledge of overcoming them and bringing about a great change in their own lives and their peer lives. I think if we create a link between the digital transformation and entrepreneurship for women, whether it is rural, semi-rural or urban, I think there would be a big change happening because it leads to a great level of output. it's not a very short-term thing. It leads to output. So I think that is something that we'll have to look into it. And obviously, there are issues of cyber security and cyber safety. These the women have to look into it. If you do that, my sense is this holistic thing which I have talked about would start taking some shape. So I'll just close on one sentence, which is what I call the core of what I was trying to convey. Looking digital transformation and looking at digital technologies transforming the lives of women and integrating that as a policy is a great idea. But I think what is needed absolutely at most is, do we see digital inclusion in a larger perspective as a larger part of a digital gender inequality? If we do so, then we see the linkages between digital inclusion and other inclusion policies as well. So this is exactly what I wanted to say in a nutshell. I mean, I hope I was able to bring my points forward through this virtual, play. And I'll be very happy to hear some other people as well. So thank you so much, Chairman, and my co-panelists and all the audiences.
Thank you.